Alright, settle in, folks, because you are not going to believe this one. If you've ever had a neighbor who made you consider moving to a deserted island, then this story is for you. It all started when my wife, Sarah, and I thought we'd found our little slice of paradise. Turns out, paradise came with a gatekeeper from the seventh circle of nosy. We'd just bought this lovely house in a neighborhood that, on the surface, looked like something out of a feel-good movie. Manicured lawns, kids riding bikes, the whole 9 yards. It had an HOA, a homeowners association, which, can be a mixed bag. My previous experience was minimal, mostly just paying dues and getting a newsletter about the annual picnic. Oh, how naive I was. How wonderfully, blissfully naive. This HOA, it turned out, was less about community spirit and more about Brenda McSnout. Brenda wasn't her real last name, of course, but it's the one I gave her in my head, and eventually the one Sarah and I used between ourselves. It just fit. She was the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, president of the HOA, and chief inspector of everyone's business. We hadn't even finished unpacking the second box of kitchen stuff when she made her grand entrance. The doorbell rang, and there she was. Picture this. A woman whose posture was so rigid, I swear she ironed her spine. She had that haircut, the I need to speak to your manager and then their manager special. She was holding a Tupperware container with what looked suspiciously like store-bought cookies and a binder thick enough to stop a small-caliber bullet. "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates," she announced, her voice a little too loud, a little too saccharine. "I'm Brenda Maxwell, president of our esteemed Homeowners Association." She practically vibrated with self-importance. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying for friendly. "I'm Tom, and my wife Sarah is around here somewhere." Sarah, bless her, emerged from the living room, wiping dust off her hands. Sarah's amazing. She's calm, she's practical, and she has this quiet strength about her that I've always admired. She's also an avid gardener, which will become relevant, trust me. Brenda's eyes did a quick scan of Sarah, then me, then the still messy entryway. I could almost hear the click-click-click of her internal judgment meter. "This," Brenda said, thrusting the binder at me, "is our community covenant, our rules and regulations. I suggest you both familiarize yourselves with it thoroughly. We pride ourselves on maintaining a certain standard here." The binder landed in my hands with a thud. It was, no joke, over 100 pages. I flipped through it later. Rules about lawn height to the millimeter, I swear, mailbox color, approved shrubbery, the precise angle at which your garbage cans could face the street. It was a tyrant's dream. "Thanks," Sarah said, her smile polite but firm. "We'll definitely take a look." Brenda lingered, her gaze sweeping over our front yard. "I did notice your moving truck was parked on the street for over 4 hours yesterday. Section 4, subsection B clearly states commercial vehicles must be moved after 2 hours unless actively unloading." I blinked. We were actively unloading for the whole 4 hours. It was a big truck. Brenda hummed, a little skeptical. "Just something to keep in mind for the future. We like to keep our streets clear and picturesque." She gave another tight smile, then departed, leaving us with the cookies, which were, indeed, stale Oreos repackaged, and the ominous binder. "Well," I said to Sarah, once the door was safely closed, "she seems dedicated." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Dedicated to what exactly? That was the million-dollar question. The first few weeks were a barrage of minor infractions. A polite but firm email from Brenda about the brand of bird feeder we'd hung. Apparently, only classic Victorian-style feeders were acceptable, not our rustic wooden one. A note taped to our door because our newspaper delivery person had left the paper 2 inches too far to the left of the welcome mat. I'm not even exaggerating. Sarah, being an early riser and a lover of all things green, was often out in the garden at the crack of dawn. She had her tools, of course. A sturdy trowel, pruning shears, sometimes a small hoary knife she used for weeding and planting bulbs. These were always neatly attached to a tool belt or carried in her gardening apron. To anyone with common sense, she looked like a gardener. But Brenda McSnout didn't seem to operate on common sense. She operated on suspicion and the thrill of rule enforcement. One Saturday morning, Sarah was out front, happily tending to some new rose bushes we'd planted. She was wearing her usual gardening attire, old jeans, a comfortable shirt, and her tool belt with her shears and soil knife. I was inside, making coffee, when I saw Brenda across the street, peering through her perfectly polished living room window, her silhouette like a hawk spotting a field mouse. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. An email from Brenda. Subject: concerning item in yard. My stomach did a little flip. Here we go. The email, in her usual passive-aggressive corporate speak, stated, "Dear residents of 12 Maple Lane, it has come to my attention that potentially unapproved and, frankly, somewhat alarming implements are being openly displayed in your front yard. Please refer to Section 7, subsection C regarding appropriate yard maintenance tools and display. We must ensure the aesthetic harmony and perceived safety of our community." I read it out loud to Sarah when she came in, covered in dirt and smiling. Her smile faded a little. Alarming implements? Is she talking about my trowel? Or your shears of doom? I snorted. Who knows with her? This woman is unbelievable. This was the inciting incident, the first real sign that Brenda wasn't just a stickler for rules, but someone who was actively looking for trouble, for things to twist into problems. And it was clear she had her sights set firmly on us, the newcomers who dared to have a non-Victorian bird feeder and, apparently, alarming gardening tools. What do you guys think? Overreaction on Brenda's part? Or am I missing something about the dangers of a trowel? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious. The alarming implements email was just the opening salvo in what quickly became a full-blown campaign of harassment from Brenda McSnout. It was like she had nothing better to do than monitor our every move. And I mean every move. If I backed my car out of the driveway 5 miles per hour over her imaginary cul-de-sac speed limit, we'd get an email about reckless driving if our porch light bulb wasn't the exact shade of soft amber, specified in the HOA covenant, page 47, by the way. Another email. She complained that the wind chimes Sarah hung tiny. Tinkling things that barely made a sound were a noise nuisance. Does she have microphones pointed at our house? I asked Sarah one evening, exasperated, after receiving a warning because one of our garbage can lids wasn't fully latched on trash day. The lid had been down, mind you, just not clicked shut. How she even saw that from across the street was beyond me, unless she was using binoculars, which honestly I wouldn't have put past her. Sarah, bless her patient soul, would just sigh. Tom, she's just a very particular person. Particular? She's a menace. I fumed. This isn't particular. This is bordering on stalking. The emails were always CC'd to the other HOA board members, whose names we vaguely knew but hadn't really interacted with. A Mr. Henderson, a Miss Perkins. Neither of them ever replied to Brenda's missives, which I found odd. Were they complicit, or just terrified of her? We started talking to other neighbors very cautiously at first. Turns out we weren't Brenda's only targets, just her newest and therefore most exciting ones. Old man Fitzwilliam, 3 doors down, told us in a conspiratorial whisper over the fence that Brenda had tried to fine him for the unapproved color of his garden gnomes. Garden gnomes, people. Apparently only earth-tone gnomes were acceptable. His were bright red and blue. He told her where she could stick her earth tones, which I secretly applauded. Another neighbor, a young couple named Jen and Mark, said Brenda had hounded them for months about the type of gravel they used in their driveway edging. She actually came over with a ruler and a color swatch, Jen told us, rolling her eyes. A color swatch for gravel. It was becoming clear that Brenda's power within the HOA was largely unchecked, or at least unchallenged. People were either too tired to fight, too intimidated, or just wanted to live their lives in peace, even if it meant kowtowing to her ridiculous demands. Sarah, meanwhile, was getting increasingly frustrated, though she showed it far less than I did. Her garden was her sanctuary, her happy place, and Brenda seemed determined to find fault with every leaf and petal. One day, Brenda sent an email complaining that Sarah's sunflowers were obstructing the sight line from her kitchen window to the community mailbox. Our sunflowers were on the opposite side of our yard from her house and nowhere near the mailboxes. It was utterly baffling. "She's making things up now," Sarah said, a rare edge in her voice. "This is just harassment." "I know, honey," I said, putting my arm around her. "We need to start documenting this. Every email, every note, every ridiculous complaint. Dates, times, everything." And so we did. We created a special folder in our email, titled The Brenda Chronicles. We took photos of our infractions alongside the relevant HOA rule, often highlighting how Brenda was misinterpreting it or how the rule itself was absurd. We started keeping a log of her drive-bys, her window-peering sessions. It felt a bit silly, like we were spies in our own neighborhood, but it also felt necessary. My own frustration was morphing into a kind of grim resolve. This woman wasn't going to bully us out of our home or make our lives miserable without a fight. The problem was, how do you fight someone who wields a 100-page rulebook like a weapon and seems to have the entire HOA board in her pocket? We found out a bit more about Brenda's history. Apparently, she'd been HOA president for 10 years. The previous president had moved away suddenly. Fled was the word Old Man Fitzwilliam used. Brenda had stepped into the power vacuum and solidified her reign. Elections were a formality. No one ever ran against her. It was a tiny fiefdom, and she was its undisputed queen. The stress was starting to get to us. We'd moved here for peace and quiet, to build a life. Instead, we felt like we were constantly under surveillance, waiting for the next passive-aggressive email or thinly veiled threat. Sarah, who normally loved puttering in the yard, started to feel self-conscious out there, knowing Brenda's eyes were likely boring into her back. "This isn't right," I said to Sarah one night. "We can't live like this. We have to do something more." Sarah nodded slowly. "I agree. But what?" Reason doesn't seem to work with her. That was the understatement of the year. Reasoning with Brenda McSnout was like trying to teach quantum physics to a goldfish. A very angry, judgmental goldfish. We considered ignoring her, but her complaints were often framed as official HOA warnings, implying fines could follow. We considered moving, but damn it, we loved our house. We'd poured our savings into it. Why should we be the ones to leave? The tension kept ratcheting up. Brenda started leaving little violation slips on our door, printed on bright orange paper, looking like official parking tickets. One was for excessive dandelion presence in our lawn. We'd counted 3 dandelions. Another was for a garden hose that was not coiled in a regulation clockwise spiral. I swear, I am not making this up. Clockwise spiral. Is this an HOA or a cult? Seriously, drop a comment if your HOA has rules this crazy. I need to know I'm not alone in this madness. It was around this time that Sarah started a new project in the backyard. We had a bit of a slope, and she wanted to build a small retaining wall and a terraced herb garden. It was well within our property lines, involved no major construction, and frankly was going to be beautiful. She was excited about it. Of course, Brenda found out. How, we don't know. Maybe she'd installed spy drones. Maybe she just had a sixth sense for anyone daring to experience joy within a 5-mile radius of her. The next escalation was coming. We could feel it, and it was going to be a doozy. We just didn't know how bad it would get. The breaking point, the incident that took this whole ridiculous feud to a DEFCON 1 level, happened on a crisp Saturday afternoon. Sarah had been at the shooting range earlier that morning. It was one of her hobbies, a way she de-stressed and maintained a skill set that, unbeknownst to Brenda and most of our neighbors, was highly relevant to her profession. Sarah is a major with the state police. Not a desk job major either. She's in charge of a significant tactical unit. She's seen things, done things, and commanded people in situations that would make Brenda McSnout's meticulously ordered world implode. But in our neighborhood, she was just Sarah, the quiet woman who liked to garden. She preferred it that way. She didn't wear her rank on her sleeve when she was off duty. So, she came home from the range, and as she often did, she brought her locked gun case in from the car. She intended to take it straight to the gun safe in our study. Her service weapon, properly holstered and concealed under her jacket as per regulations and state law, was on her person. As she walked from the driveway to our front porch, her jacket shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, the butt of her holstered firearm might have been visible if someone was, say, scrutinizing her every move with high-powered binoculars from across the street. Which, of course, Brenda McSnout was. I was in the kitchen making lunch. Suddenly, I heard a commotion outside. Raised voices. Not just raised, but shrieking. And one of those voices was unmistakably Brenda's. My blood ran cold. I rushed to the front window. What I saw made my jaw drop. Brenda was standing on the edge of our lawn, practically vibrating with fury. Her face beat red. She was pointing a trembling finger at Sarah, who stood calmly on our porch, looking bewildered. "She has a gun," Brenda shrieked, loud enough for the entire county to hear. "A gun. She's threatening us all. Call the police. Someone call the police. She's a menace, a danger to our children." Now, several things here. 1. Sarah was on her own property. 2. She was legally carrying. 3. She hadn't threatened anyone. She was literally just walking into her house. 4. Brenda was, to put it mildly, losing her ever-loving mind. Neighbors started poking their heads out of their doors. Old man Fitzwilliam was on his porch, looking concerned. Jen and Mark were peering through their blinds. "Brenda," Sarah said, her voice low and steady, trying to de-escalate. "Please calm down. I am legally permitted to carry a firearm. I am on my own property. I am not threatening anyone." "Lies," Brenda screamed. "You're brandishing it. I saw it. You're going to shoot us all. I'm calling 911. And with that, she whipped out her phone and frantically started dialing, still screeching about imminent danger. This was it. Brenda's major offensive. She wasn't just sending emails anymore. She was calling the cops, making a false, hysterical accusation. The stakes had just skyrocketed. My wife, a decorated law enforcement officer, was about to have armed police descend on her because of this lunatic. I felt a surge of cold anger mixed with genuine fear. You never know how these situations will play out when police are responding to a person with a gun call, especially one fueled by hysterics. Anything could happen. "Sarah," I called, rushing to the door. "Are you okay?" She looked at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and steely resolve. "I'm fine, Tom. Just stay calm. Let me handle this." But how do you handle a human hurricane of baseless accusations? What do you think, folks? Has anyone ever had someone call the cops on them for something completely ridiculous? Share your story. I'm genuinely curious, because this was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. The wail of sirens cut through the suburban quiet not 5 minutes later. My heart hammered against my ribs. 2 police cruisers, lights flashing, screeched to a halt in front of our house. Brenda, seeing them, seemed to swell with vindication, pointing dramatically at Sarah. "There she is, officers. The one with the gun. She's a threat." 2 officers got out, a younger one looking tense and ready for anything, an older, more seasoned officer moving a bit more deliberately, his eyes scanning the scene. Their hands were near their own firearms. This was serious. This was really, really serious. My wife, a highly respected state police major, was being treated like a potential active shooter in her own front yard. "Ma'am, on the porch," the older officer called out, his voice firm but not aggressive yet. "I need you to keep your hands visible. Please." Sarah, to her absolute credit, remained incredibly calm. She slowly raised her hands, palms open. "Officers," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "My name is Sarah Miller. I reside here. I am a sworn law enforcement officer with the state police. I am carrying my service weapon, and I have my credentials." Brenda scoffed loudly. "She's lying. She's trying to trick you. Arrest her." The officers ignored Brenda for the moment, their focus entirely on Sarah. The younger one was still antsy. The older one, Officer Davies, as I later learned his name was, had a thoughtful expression. "Ma'am, can you slowly provide your identification?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "It's in my jacket pocket, left side. May I reach for it slowly?" "Proceed slowly, ma'am," Officer Davies instructed. I was holding my breath. The entire neighborhood seemed to be watching. I could feel their eyes. This was beyond humiliating. It was terrifying. If these officers were jumpy, if Brenda kept riling them up. Sarah very, very slowly reached into her jacket and pulled out her official state police ID and badge. She held it out. Officer Davies approached cautiously, took the credentials and examined them. The younger officer kept his eyes locked on Sarah. I watched Officer Davies' face. His eyebrows went up. Then they went up a little more. He looked from the ID to Sarah, then back to the ID. He turned it over, checking the back. His whole demeanor began to shift. He took a small step back. He looked at his partner. Then he looked back at Sarah. And then, clear as day, he straightened up, a look of dawning recognition and respect on his face. He brought his hand up in a crisp, formal salute. "Major Miller," he said, his voice now tinged with surprise and deference. "Apologies for the intrusion. We received a weapons complaint." The younger officer, seeing his partner salute, looked utterly bewildered for a second, then quickly followed suit. His salute a little less polished but just as sincere. It took, from the moment Officer Davies took her ID to the moment he saluted, maybe 45 seconds? The title says 42. Felt that fast. It was an incredibly swift, sudden, and dramatic shift in the entire situation. One moment, my wife was a suspected suburban menace. The next, she was being saluted by the very officers called to apprehend her. Brenda Mixnout's jaw, which had been flapping nonstop, snapped shut with an audible click. Her face went from triumphant red to a sort of pasty, shocked white. Her eyes darted between Sarah, the saluting officers, and back again. She looked like a cartoon character who'd just run off a cliff and was suspended in midair, realizing gravity was about to kick in. Major," Brenda stammered, her voice a squeak. What is this?" Officer Davies turned to Brenda, his expression now decidedly less friendly. "Ma'am, Major Miller is a ranking officer with the state police. She is legally and professionally authorized to carry her firearm. We will be having a word with you about making false reports." Oh, you could have heard a pin drop. Or maybe that was just the sound of Brenda's entire world collapsing around her. The sheer, unadulterated shock on her face was something I will treasure for the rest of my days. Take a moment and picture that. Go on, you deserve it. The immediate aftermath of the salute on Maple Lane, as I started calling it in my head, was pure, unadulterated chaos for Brenda and sweet vindication for us. Officer Davies and his partner spent a good 20 minutes talking to Sarah, very respectfully, confirming the details and taking her statement about Brenda's actions. Then, Officer Davies turned his attention to a now very deflated and pale Brenda Mixnout. He was stern, professional, and did not mince words. He explained to her, in no uncertain terms, the seriousness of filing a false police report, especially one involving firearms and alleging threats. He pointed out the waste of police resources, the potential danger such a call could create. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying in the suddenly very quiet street. "You caused a significant disturbance here today based on what appears to be a gross misjudgment, at best, or a malicious fabrication at worst. Major Miller was on her own property, lawfully carrying, and by all accounts, not threatening anyone." Brenda tried to sputter some defense. But the rules, the HOA rules. Strangers with guns." "Ma'am," Officer Davies cut her off, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This is a police matter, not an HOA matter. And your rules do not supersede state law or an officer's right to carry, especially when they are in their own home or on their own property. We will be filing a report on this incident. I strongly advise you to be absolutely certain of your facts before calling 911 again. He didn't arrest her then and there for the false report, though I secretly wished he would. But he did give her a formal warning, and I could see the cogs turning in Sarah's head. This wasn't over. Brenda had crossed a major line. As the police cars pulled away, the neighborhood seemed to collectively exhale. Jen and Mark from next door actually came over, looking apologetic. "We are so sorry, Sarah, Tom," Jen said. "We saw the whole thing." Brenda was unhinged. "She's always been a bit much, but this is a new low," Mark added, shaking his head. Old man Fitzwilliam gave Sarah a thumbs up from his porch. "Good on ya, lass," he called out. The most satisfying part, though, was seeing Brenda scuttle back into her house. Her shoulders slumped, her usual queenly arrogance completely gone. She looked small, defeated, for now. Later that evening, Sarah and I sat down to discuss what had just happened. The adrenaline had worn off, and we were left with a mixture of relief, lingering anger, and a sense of opportunity. "She can't get away with this, Tom," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not just about us anymore. She's abusing her position, harassing people, and now she's making false police reports. That's serious." "I agree," I said. "So, what's the plan, Major Miller?" I couldn't resist a little teasing, and she actually cracked a smile. "The plan," she said, "is to let Brenda continue to dig her own hole. She's humiliated right now, but knowing her, she won't back down. She'll try something else. She'll try to use the HOA to punish me because the police wouldn't." "You think so?" I asked. "I know so," Sarah said. "People like Brenda don't learn from embarrassment. They just get angrier and more determined to prove they were right all along. Her ego is massive. She'll call an HOA meeting. She'll try to paint me as a danger, try to get me sanctioned, maybe even try to get us kicked out of the neighborhood for violating some trumped-up rule about community safety or firearm display. And when she does," Sarah's smile became a little predatory. "When she does, we'll be ready. We have our Brenda Chronicles, we have witness statements from today. And I might just have a quiet word with my commanding officer about the proper channels for addressing a civilian making repeated false accusations against law enforcement personnel, and for addressing an HOA that allows one person to terrorize a neighborhood." This was the turning point. Brenda, in her arrogance and fury, had massively overplayed her hand. She thought she was swatting a fly. She'd actually poked a bear. A very calm, very intelligent, and very well-connected bear. Brenda's confidence, which had taken a nosedive after the police incident, didn't stay down for long. It was like a cursed inflatable clown. You could punch it down, but it would just slowly, malevolently reinflate. She was humiliated, yes, but people like Brenda don't react to humiliation with introspection and a change of ways. They react with even more entrenched indignation and a burning desire for revenge. She couldn't get Sarah arrested, so she decided she would get her sanctioned by the almighty HOA. Her fatal flaw, her absolute arrogance and inability to conceive that she could lose, was about to be her undoing. Sure enough, less than a week later, an official-looking notice appeared on every door in Willow Creek Estates. "Emergency HOA meeting." It declared in bold, ominous type. Subject: community safety and adherence to covenant guidelines. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse. "She's actually doing it," I said to Sarah, holding up the notice. "She's doubling down." Sarah read it over my shoulder, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "Of course she is. Her ego demands it. She has to reassert her dominance after that public takedown." The notice was carefully worded, avoiding any direct mention of Sarah or the firearm incident, but the implication was crystal clear. It spoke of recent events that have raised concerns among residents, and the need to reinforce community standards to ensure a tranquil and secure environment for all. It was pure Brenda speak. Vague enough to avoid immediate legal trouble, but loaded enough to let everyone know exactly who and what she was talking about. "So, what's our strategy for this tranquil and secure environment meeting?" I asked. "Do we go in guns blazing, metaphorically speaking?" Sarah shook her head. "No. We go in calm. We let Brenda have her say. We let her make all her accusations and whip up whatever frenzy she can. And then," she paused, "we present the facts, quietly, clearly, and with evidence." Over the next few days we prepared. We printed out copies of every single one of Brenda's harassing emails and violation notices. We wrote down dates and times of her specific actions, the lawn measuring, the garbage can inspections. We even got a written statement from Old Man Fitzwilliam about the gnome incident and from Jen and Mark about the gravel saga. They were initially hesitant, scared of retaliation from Brenda, but the public nature of the police incident had emboldened them. They were tired of being bullied. Sarah also did something else. She made a phone call, a very discreet phone call to her direct superior, Colonel Anderson. She explained the situation, the ongoing harassment, the false police report, and Brenda's apparent intention to use the HOA meeting to further slander her and potentially compromise her professional standing by painting her as unstable or dangerous. Colonel Anderson, from what Sarah told me, was displeased, very displeased. He listened patiently, asked a few pointed questions, and then said, "Major, you handle that HOA meeting. Let me know the outcome. And rest assured, making false accusations against one of my officers is something we take extremely seriously. We'll be looking into this from our end as well, regarding potential interference with a law enforcement officer and misuse of emergency services." That was a significant weight off our minds. Knowing that the state police were aware and, if necessary, would get involved at a higher level, gave Sarah an extra layer of confidence. Not that she needed much, but it was good to know. The build-up to the HOA meeting was palpable. You could feel the tension in the air around the neighborhood. People were whispering. Some were clearly on Brenda's side, the ones who liked her iron-fisted rule because it kept property values high, or perhaps they were just too scared to think otherwise. Others were more sympathetic to us, tired of Brenda's tyranny but unsure what to do about it. And many were probably just curious, eager for some suburban drama. Brenda, in the days leading up to it, was a whirlwind of activity. We'd see her marching from house to house, binder in hand, presumably drumming up support, spreading her version of events. No doubt a highly fictionalized account where she was the brave hero standing up to the dangerous newcomer. She probably painted Sarah as some kind of rogue vigilante. The irony was thicker than her 100-page rulebook. "She's really going all out, isn't she?" I remarked, watching Brenda earnestly lecturing Mrs. Henderson on her porch. "Let her," Sarah said calmly, sipping her tea. "The higher she builds her platform, the harder she'll fall." I had to admit there was a certain anticipation building in me too. Part of me was still nervous, but a bigger part was looking forward to seeing Brenda McSnout finally face some real accountability. This wasn't just about a disagreement over lawn maintenance anymore. This was about abuse of power, about malicious harassment, about a woman who had made it her mission to make our lives, and the lives of others, miserable. What do you think is going to happen at the meeting? Drop your predictions in the comments. Will Brenda finally get her comeuppance? Or will she somehow weasel her way out of it again? Hit that like button if you want to see Brenda face the music. Tuesday evening arrived, cool and clear. The community clubhouse, a rather sad little building with faded paint and a lingering smell of old coffee, was packed. I don't think I'd ever seen so many of our neighbors in one place. Word had clearly gotten around that this wasn't going to be your average discussion about pool maintenance schedules. Brenda McSnout was at the front, a makeshift podium before her, looking incredibly self-important. She had her two loyal board members, Miss Perkins and Mr. Henderson, flanking her like slightly uncomfortable bookends. Miss Perkins, a woman who always looked like she just smelled something bad, was fussing with a stack of papers. Mr. Henderson, a portly man with a perpetually worried expression, kept adjusting his tie. Sarah and I took seats near the back. We had our folder, our Brenda Chronicles, sitting innocuously on Sarah's lap. Sarah was the epitome of calm, her expression neutral. I, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves, trying to project an aura of nonchalance I definitely didn't feel. Brenda banged a small gavel, which looked suspiciously like a meat tenderizer, on the podium. "Order! Order! This emergency meeting of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association is now in session," her voice boomed, unnaturally loud in the small room. She launched into her tirade. Oh, it was a masterpiece of manipulative rhetoric, half-truths, and outright lies. She spoke of grave concerns for the safety and sanctity of our community. She mentioned certain individuals, who showed a flagrant disregard for our carefully crafted covenants, and, more ominously, introduced elements of potential danger. She never mentioned Sarah by name, not at first. But everyone knew. Everyone. "We have rules for a reason," Brenda declared, her voice rising with emotion. "These rules are the bedrock of our peaceful coexistence. They protect our property values. They protect our children. And when someone moves into our midst who believes they are above these rules, who openly displays who engages in behavior that makes law-abiding citizens feel unsafe in their own homes, then we, as a community, must act." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes sweeping the room, trying to gauge support. Some people nodded along, looking grave. Others, like Old Man Fitzwilliam, who caught my eye and gave a subtle eye roll, looked skeptical. Then Brenda went for the jugular. "There was an incident recently," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "An incident involving a weapon. Right here in our peaceful neighborhood. A weapon openly carried, in a manner that caused extreme alarm." She conveniently left out the part where Sarah was on her own property, legally carrying, and that the extreme alarm was solely Brenda's manufactured hysteria. "The police were called," Brenda continued, puffing herself up, "and while they took a certain course of action, it is up to us, the HOA, to ensure that our internal community standards are upheld. We cannot have residents who believe they can intimidate their neighbors with such displays." She was painting Sarah as some kind of gun-toting aggressor. The audacity was breathtaking. Finally, after about 20 minutes of this fear-mongering, Brenda concluded, "Therefore, I propose a motion to formally censure the resident or residents responsible for this breach of community peace and safety, and to explore further sanctions, including significant fines, and, if necessary, legal action to compel compliance or removal." A murmur went through the crowd. This was serious. She was actually trying to get us kicked out. Miss Perkins, on cue, piped up, "I second the motion." "All right," Brenda said, looking smug. "The motion is on the floor. Is there any discussion?" This was our cue. Sarah stood up slowly. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to her. "Yes, Brenda," Sarah said, her voice calm and clear, but with an undeniable undercurrent of authority. "I believe there is some discussion warranted, and perhaps some clarification." Brenda's smile faltered slightly. "Very well, Mrs. Miller. You have the floor." Briefly, Sarah walked to the front of the room, not to the podium, but standing to the side, facing the residents. "Good evening, everyone," she began. "My name is Sarah Miller, and I, along with my husband Tom, are the certain individuals Brenda has been referring to." She paused, letting that sink in. Brenda has painted a rather alarming picture. A picture of a dangerous newcomer, brandishing weapons, terrorizing the neighborhood. "I'm here to tell you that picture is entirely false." She then, calmly and methodically, dismantled Brenda's entire narrative. She explained the actual events of the day the police were called. She explained her profession, and you could see a ripple of surprise go through the room when she identified herself as a major with the state police. She explained her legal right to carry a firearm, especially on her own property. "The extreme alarm," Sarah stated, looking directly at Brenda, "was manufactured entirely by you, Brenda. You called 911 with a false report, claiming I was threatening people. The responding officers, once they understood the facts and my identity, were entirely professional and, in fact, apologized for the disturbance you caused." Brenda started to sputter. "That's not. You're twisting things." "Am I?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. She then opened the Brenda Chronicles folder. "Because I also have here a rather extensive record of your behavior towards us and other residents, long before this incident. Emails, notes, photographs, a clear pattern of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of your position as HOA president." She held up a stack of printed emails. "Complaints about bird feeders, lawn height, the way our hose was coiled, fining Mr. Fitzwilliam for his garden gnomes, harassing the Youngs about their driveway gravel, This isn't about community safety, Brenda. This is about your personal need for control. The room was silent, except for Brenda's increasingly heavy breathing. People were looking at each other, then at Brenda, then back at Sarah. The tide was turning. You could feel it. Furthermore, Sarah continued, her voice like ice, filing a false police report is a serious offense. My commanding officer, Colonel Anderson of the State Police, is aware of this situation. He is aware of your actions, Brenda. And he is taking it very seriously. That was the kill shot. The mention of a colonel. The implication of a higher authority now scrutinizing Brenda's behavior. Brenda's face, which had been fluctuating between red and white, now settled on a sickly shade of green. She looked like she was going to be physically ill. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but finding only shocked or disapproving faces. Mr. Henderson suddenly found his shoes incredibly fascinating. Miss Perkins looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. This is an outrage. Brenda finally managed, her voice cracking. She's trying to intimidate us with her position. No, Brenda, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly but still firm.
I'm stating facts.
You are the one who has been intimidating this community for years. You are the one who has abused your power. And today, it stops. Then Old Man Fitzwilliam stood up. She's right, you know, he declared, his voice surprisingly strong. This woman, Brenda, has been a bully for too long, fining me for gnomes. What nonsense. It's high time someone stood up to her. Jen Young stood up too. And the gravel. She made our lives a misery over gravel. Suddenly, other voices joined in. A chorus of grievances, of stories of petty tyranny and harassment, all directed at Brenda. It was like a dam had burst. Years of pent-up frustration were finally being released. Brenda McSnout just stood there, speechless, as her carefully constructed kingdom crumbled around her. Her plan to publicly shame and sanction Sarah had backfired spectacularly. Instead, she was the one being publicly exposed, her reign of terror brought to an abrupt and very satisfying end. What do you guys think? Is this the most epic HOA takedown ever? Let me know. I want to hear your wildest HOA president stories. The fallout from that HOA meeting was swift and glorious. Brenda McSnout's meltdown was a sight to behold. As more and more residents voiced their complaints against her, her face went through about 50 shades of fury and disbelief. She tried to interrupt, to shout them down, to reassert her authority with her meat tenderizer gavel. But it was no use. The dam had broken. This is slander. Libel! She shrieked, her voice cracking. You can't do this. I am the president. Mr. Henderson, who had been looking increasingly green around the gills, finally found his voice. Brenda, he said, his tone quavering but firm. I think perhaps you should resign. Miss Perkins, surprisingly, nodded in agreement. Yes, Brenda. After all this, I don't see how you can continue. Brenda stared at her two erstwhile allies, her mouth agape. Betrayed. By her own board. The shock was almost comical. She looked like a fish that had just been slapped with another fish. Resign? She whispered. Then her voice rose again. Resign. I will not resign. This is my HO. I built this community. Sarah stepped forward again. Brenda, she said, her voice calm but carrying undeniable weight. The motion on the floor was to censure a resident for breaching community peace. Given the testimony we've heard tonight, it seems the person who has most consistently breached the peace and abused their position is, in fact, you. She turned to the assembled residents. I propose a new motion. A motion of no confidence in Brenda Maxwell as HOA president, and for her immediate removal from the board. I second that, boomed Old Man Fitzwilliam, practically leaping to his feet. A chorus of ayes filled the room. It was overwhelming. Brenda looked around wildly, seeking a friendly face, a dissenting voice, but found none. Even her staunchest supporters, those who had benefited from her selective rule enforcement or simply feared her, were silent or nodding in agreement with the new motion. The vote was taken by a show of hands. It was nearly unanimous. Brenda McSnout was out. Stripped of her power, her title, her entire reason for being, it seemed. She didn't take it well. There was some more shrieking, some vague threats of lawsuits, and then she stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her with such force that a piece of the faded acoustic tile fell from the ceiling. It was a perfectly undignified exit for a perfectly undignified tyrant. In the days that followed, the neighborhood felt lighter. People were actually smiling at each other. There was an impromptu gathering in Old Man Fitzwilliam's yard, complete with his brightly colored gnomes proudly on display, to celebrate Liberation Day, as he called it. Sarah and I became accidental heroes. People kept stopping by to thank us, to share their own stories of Brenda's petty tyrannies. It was quite overwhelming. The HOA board held an emergency election. Mr. Henderson, looking immensely relieved to be out from under Brenda's thumb, was voted in as the interim president. His first act was to propose a review of the entire 100-page covenant, with an eye towards removing the more ridiculous and restrictive rules. The clockwise hose coiling rule was, thankfully, the first to go. As for Brenda, her defeat was comprehensive. Not only was she ousted from the HOA, but Officer Davies did follow through. Brenda received a formal, official warning from the local police department regarding the misuse of emergency services and filing a false report. They stopped short of pressing charges, likely because Sarah indicated she didn't want to pursue it that far, but the warning went on her record. Furthermore, Colonel Anderson's office did, in fact, send a polite but very firm letter to the Willow Creek Estates HOA, addressed to the acting president, outlining the seriousness of a community leader making false and inflammatory accusations against a law enforcement officer and the potential legal ramifications for the HOA itself if such behavior was tolerated or encouraged. That letter, which Mr. Henderson read aloud at the next, much more cheerful HOA meeting, pretty much ensured that no future HOA president would dare to go on a Brenda-style power trip. The best part? About a month after the great HOA uprising, a for sale sign appeared in Brenda McSnout's meticulously manicured, HOA-compliant front yard. She couldn't stand being just another resident. She couldn't stand the sympathetic or gleeful looks from her neighbors. She couldn't stand not being in charge. So, she packed up her rule books and her resentment and moved. We never found out where she went, but I sincerely pity the next neighborhood that has to deal with her. Our lives returned to a wonderful, blissful normalcy. Sarah could garden in peace, her alarming implements safely on her tool belt, without fear of surveillance or censure. I could back out of my driveway without worrying about a stopwatch-wielding lunatic. We even got a new bird feeder, a brightly colored, decidedly non-Victorian one, and it looked fantastic. The peace that settled over Willow Creek Estates was profound. Turns out, when you remove the local despot, people are generally pretty reasonable and happy to coexist. Who knew? So what's the moral of this story? I guess it's that bullies, no matter how much power they seem to wield, often rely on intimidation and people's unwillingness to challenge them. Sometimes all it takes is one person, or in our case, one very calm, very competent state police major, to stand up and say enough, and maybe also, don't call the cops with bogus claims, especially when the person you're accusing might just outrank the entire local police force. Karma, as they say, can be a real stickler for the rules too. Looking back, it's almost funny. Almost. The stress Brenda put us through was very real at the time. We felt besieged in our own home, our dream turning into a bit of a nightmare. But seeing her reign come crashing down, seeing the relief and joy on our neighbors' faces, that was priceless. It was a masterclass in how arrogance and a lust for control can lead to a spectacular downfall. Sarah, of course, handled the whole thing with her usual grace and professionalism. She never gloated, never lorded her position over anyone, except perhaps in that one, very necessary moment at the HOA meeting. She just wanted to live peacefully and do her job, both in our yard and for the state. After Brenda left, Sarah even volunteered to help Mr. Henderson and the new HOA board draft some more sensible community guidelines, focusing on actual safety and neighborly respect rather than aesthetic tyranny. She also organized a neighborhood watch program in conjunction with the local police, building bridges rather than burning them, which was a very Sarah thing to do. As for me, I learned a lot. I learned that HOAs can, indeed, be breeding grounds for petty tyrants if good people don't pay attention. I learned the importance of documenting everything when you're dealing with someone unreasonable. And I learned that my wife is even more of a rock star than I already thought she was. Which, believe me, was a pretty high bar to begin with. We still live in Willow Creek Estates. It's genuinely a lovely place now. The lawns are still neat, but there's a bit more personality in the gardens. Old man Fitzwilliam even added a bright pink flamingo to his gnome collection, just because he could, and no one bats an eye. Every now and then, when Sarah's out gardening, I'll catch a glimpse of her tool belt, and I'll remember Brenda shrieking about alarming implements, and then I'll remember those 2 police officers, their hands going up in a salute, and the look on Brenda's face, and I can't help but smile. So there you have it. The story of how HOA Karen called the cops on my wife for wearing a gun, and how it led to her epic downfall. It just goes to show you never know who you're messing with. Sometimes, the quiet gardener next door is the one who can bring the whole house of cards tumbling down. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. Folks, I hope you got a bit of a laugh, and maybe a little bit of satisfaction from Brenda's comeuppance. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the story. Subscribe for more tales of madness and mayhem, and definitely share this video with anyone who's ever had to deal with an out-of-control HOA Karen. Let me know in the comments. What's the craziest HOA rule you've ever heard of? I'll be reading and hearting my favorites. Until next time, stay safe, and don't let the Brendas of the world get you down.